Welcome, everyone. We're going to start in just a minute. Greetings from Austin, Texas. My name is Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, and I am the Assistant Dean for Civic Engagement at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. This year, we turned 50, and in celebrating our 50th birthday, we turn to looking at folks who are making a difference, making an impact, not just in the halls of academia, but in our communities and in the arena. We are today 49 days away from the November election. So today's session on protecting the vote is incredibly timely. And we have with us today two of the people on the very front lines of protecting the integrity of the right to vote. It is my pleasure to welcome Travis County Clerk Dana DeBeauvoir, who is a proud LBJ alum and was also the recipient of Public Official of the Year by the National Association of County Clerks. And from down the road in Harris County, we have Chris Hollins, an attorney and fourth-generation Houstonian. Chris is also the first Black county clerk in Harris County's history. And Chris, I heard that you have a newborn, so congratulations. And also, I can't even begin to imagine the craziness that you are living these days. So I know that there are going to be a number of questions from the audience. We've already been receiving them from prior to this session. So I want to let everyone know that I'm going to make sure to leave enough time for everyone's questions. Just please make sure you put them into the Q&A box in the Zoom function. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the conversation. And Chris, I want to start with you. I want to start with the headline from the Texas Tribune in that the Texas Supreme Court, again, blocked efforts by Harris County to send out mail-in ballots. So if you could help us understand, first of all, what Harris County was wanting to do in the first place, and then what the Texas Supreme Court is wanting to block y'all from doing.
Absolutely. Well, as we all know, the right to vote is paramount to our democracy. And, you know, in the role of Chief Elections Officer of Harris County, it's my job to ensure that every registered voter in Harris County can cast their votes safely, conveniently, and with the peace of mind that their vote's going to be counted. And part of that is educating voters on their rights of how to vote, where they can vote. And we all know that voting by mail is the safest and most convenient way to vote. Not only for yourself to be able to vote from the comfort of your home, from your kitchen table, from your sofa, taking the time that you need to go through your ballot, where Harris County is going to have over 100 races and items on the ballot. But it's also safer and more convenient for everybody else, because that's one less person in line in front of them at a voting center, and one less person that they could be exposed to during the time of this deadly virus. And so what we plan to do is send applications to vote by mail, along with educational materials, to every registered voter in Harris County. Because the truth of the matter is that voters don't know if they're eligible or not. They haven't been told. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, there's no educational material there that would inform you in detail of if you're eligible to vote by mail or not. And so we want to share that and make that available to the people of Harris County. And it's well within our rights as the Chief Election Officer who is trusted to manage and conduct early voting in elections. And you know, we're fortunate that the district court sided with us on this and made it very clear that the Attorney General's efforts to stop us are baseless. And so,
and Chris,
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and what exactly is the criteria in order to be able to vote by mail here in Texas as it stands?
It's a great question. And so to my knowledge, Texas is one of only 6 states in the country right now that during the time of COVID-19, you can't vote by mail, period, across the board. You have to be eligible here in Texas. And so there's 4 ways that you can be eligible. The first is to be 65 years of age or older. The second is to be traveling outside of the county during the entire election period. The third is to be confined in jail, but otherwise eligible to vote. And the fourth one is to have a disability. And what that means under Texas law is, in addition to the traditional understanding of what it means to be disabled, it also includes if you're sick, if you're pregnant, or if voting in person will create a likelihood of injury to your health. And the Texas Supreme Court has stated very clearly that lack of immunity to COVID-19 can be considered in your health decision of if voting in person will create a likelihood of injury to your health. But it can't be the only factor. You have to have an accompanying condition. And so if you're perfectly healthy, that wouldn't count. But any number of other conditions, the Supreme Court mentioned heart conditions. I think many of us are aware of breathing conditions that create, comorbidity when it comes to COVID-19. Those can be considered. And it's up to you, the voter, to make your own decision about if you're eligible to vote or not. And the Supreme Court, as well as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, have made that very, very clear. And so we need to be able to tell people about that because people are confused. And so the state has taken an absurd position that sharing information with voters will confuse them, and leaving them in the dark will somehow alleviate that confusion. We know that the opposite is true, and we're fighting not only for the voters of Harris County, but for every voter in Texas to be able to be educated about these issues and make the determination for themselves of if they can vote by mail during this critical time.
Thanks, Chris. So Dana, I wanted to turn to you about what we've learned so far. So we had here in Texas elections that had been pushed out, but we had the primaries in July. Still in the middle of the pandemic, we were still peaking in numbers. What did we learn, and what are we going to take from that to apply to November?
We learned several lessons from the July runoff election. The first one is a more general rule. I'm concerned that the message to voters is you can't vote in person because it's not safe, and you can't vote by mail because the post office has been damaged and we can't get timely mail delivery. Well, we can't take the two main methods of voters voting and say you can't have either one of them. So we need to get past all of that. We learned in July we can make in-person voting very safe. If everybody follows the procedures, then everybody is protected. The other lesson that we learned is that by-mail voting is, despite the efforts from some in Texas to slow down by-mail voting, it is taking off at a record pace. So one of the lessons that we learned from July is we're going to have to be in front of what will be a tsunami of by-mail ballots. Just to give you an idea of how far off the charts the participation in by-mail voting is this year, in 2016, we had about 27,000 people vote by mail, and that was all of the different categories. We've already, just as of today, received more than 62,000 requests. It is perfectly reasonable that Travis County, Austin, Texas, will see 100,000 by-mail ballots. So I think that gives voters an idea of the different scale that we're dealing with. So we've had to learn lessons about we're going to need a lot more people in the clerk's office processing by-mail ballots so that we don't have a backlog to start with when it comes to tally on election night. The other thing that we're trying to do too is help people and help the post office in trying to make sure that everybody who does want to put their ballot in the mail doesn't overwhelm them or end up with a delayed ballot. So in Travis County, we're opening up 2 areas in the county for voters to bring in, hand deliver their by-mail ballot. One of them is downtown, and we're going to hold it in 3 parking garages that are directly across the street from the old courthouse building. And we'll have probably about anywhere from 9 to 11 lanes so that voters can drive up, show photo ID, sign the signature roster, and then put their voted, sealed by mail ballot into a ballot box. We think, especially as we get closer to the end of the voting period, that more and more people are going to want to take advantage of that, because they're going to be concerned that they've not left themselves enough time for the ballot to reach the office. So, and there's another one on the north side of Austin. At the North Campus, we'll have one lane of drive-through there. It's a little more complicated to offer it because it's so crowded over here. But those are lessons learned for the kinds of things that not only voters need, but we need to help the post office too. The main message to voters this time is, don't wait. Go out and vote on those first few days of early voting. By all means, as soon as you get your ballot by mail in the mail, look at it, study it, vote it, and send it back in immediately. This time, don't delay.
Right. So this is the first year that Texas is not going to have straight ticket voting. We got rid of that. This is the first major election without it. So there's the newness that comes with voting without straight ticket voting, which is likely going to make for longer voting times. Then there is, Chris, I know you guys have, I think, the longest ballot in all the country, or close to, with the most offices. So you add those two together, and then you add on top of that the fact that there, have been issues with lines and people wanting to come out and vote, and especially in a post Section 5 of the VRA, fewer polling places. What are you trying to do to navigate these constraints in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, so the answer is we're trying to do a lot. The first thing was that, to accommodate record turnout, to accommodate no straight ticket, to accommodate being able to vote from a socially distanced manner, we knew that we were going to need more voting days and more voting centers. And so that's why in July, I wrote a letter to Governor Abbott requesting that he extend the early voting period. And we were glad that he went ahead and did that, not only for Harris County, but of course for all Texans. And so now we have a record 3 weeks, 18 days of early voting, which is the longest in Texas history. Then we're talking about voting locations. We saw that in July, there were, a couple of jurisdictions across Texas that had to reduce locations because of concerns around safety, concerns around election workers. We moved in the opposite direction. We increased in July and increased again here in November. And so we're going to have 120 early voting centers in Harris County, which is triple what we had in 2016. And we're going to have over 800 locations on election day. We're also extending hours. There are going to be 3 nights during early voting where the polls stay open until 10 p.m. And at selected locations on Thursday, October 29th, we're not going to close at all. We're going to remain open for 24 hours to allow shift workers, first responders, and those with other family and work responsibilities to be able to vote, even if just for one night at a time that's convenient to them. And, another innovation, and I'll have to confess that the idea for this came from a conversation with Dana, is drive-through voting. And so we're going to have 10 drive-through voting locations in Harris County in November, where regardless of your disability status or anything like that, with no questions asked, if you want to vote from the comfort of your vehicle, you can. And so, not only will that, give voters another option to cast their ballots and potentially reduce lines, but those who are in line can wait in the comfort of their vehicle and air conditioning, listening to the radio, talking to their friends and family, and ultimately reduce their exposure to a single election worker versus all of the folks who they would encounter in a voting center.
And so Dana and Chris, just to be sure, when we talk about drive-through voting or drive-up voting, is it just to drop off your mail-in ballot, or also you can vote, but instead of walking in, you are given the ballot right then and there, you fill it out and you drop it off? Dana, what?
Right.
If I'm confused, I don't think I'm the only one.
No. There is a distinction to be made, because probably the more common term for this kind of stay in your car voting is that it's an Americans Disability Act curbside response to voters who are too ill to get out of their car and walk inside the polling place. It's longstanding law, but it is intended for a smaller population. We're going to try to do some of the same things here that Harris County is doing, but there is a difference between curbside voting for the purposes of somebody who needs that extra assistance versus drive-through hand delivery. We're not, the drive-through is only for you to put your by mail ballot in the ballot box. So it's a little bit confusing, but what we're trying to do is deal with different populations and offer more options to voters. So each time that Chris and I are able to think up some extra way that we can help voters get their voting accomplished without having to wait in line and with it being as safe as possible, he and I are both looking for every opportunity we can find to make voting fast, simple, and safe.
Absolutely. And just to be clear here, we just discussed three separate things. One is for those who are voting by mail. If they don't feel comfortable with the mail system for whatever reason, or they wait too long, they can drop that mail ballot off in person. And in Travis County, there's sort of this drive up, drop off option. The second thing we just talked about was curbside voting, which exists at every voting center, to my knowledge, in Texas, which is if you're disabled, you can request that someone bring out a machine to you and cast your vote from your vehicle. Mm-hmm. And then drive-through voting, which is somewhat similar to curbside voting in nature, but this is where an entire voting center is 100% drive-through. So you pull up in your car, there are 30, 40 slots for you to go and cast your vote from your vehicle. With no excuse, no disability, nothing like that, just because it's your own preference for convenience or safety. So those are
like going to Sonic.
Kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
It would be like voting at Sonic.
All right. So we've got. I think we're clear. I'm clear on curbside versus drop-off, mail-in, and kind of those venues that are available. But let's talk about the traditional voting, where you go into the polling place, you give your ID. I have a feeling that you guys have had to get very creative for this in terms of taking account of social distancing, no straight ticket voting, all the things we've talked about. So Dana and Chris, what is voting going to look like differently than our traditional, lobby of the elementary school or whatnot? Right. What are we going to be seeing?
Right. Well, there are a lot of really very creative voting places, right, that we're developing for voters. For example, we were having a little bit of difficulty getting into the schools because, of course, we really don't want to mix voters and children if we don't have to. Mm-hmm. So we've had to work with the Austin Independent School District and others, and they have done this incredibly brilliant thing. Our new superintendent for schools here in Austin came from Dallas, and Dallas is doing the same thing already. What we're going to do this time is for the November 3rd election day, teachers are going to take their in-service training day on that day, which will free up the schools because everybody knows the kids stay home when teachers have an in-service day. It doesn't have to be on another day. It can really help us out by being on election day. And this is the first time we will do that. That opens up a lot of schools, especially high schools that have usually very large facilities. That makes it a whole lot different. But the other creative things are we have a lot of people who are now working remotely from home. So there's a lot of empty office buildings. We're going to be using lobbies in office buildings. And one of the things that I think will surprise voters is we're going to be in ballrooms in the hotels. So it's everything we can think of. And the main reason for the change is that we needed more space, both inside and outside, so that we could socially distance voters while they're waiting to come into the polling place. And then once they're inside, we still want it to be safe inside. So we're going to have to tell voters, don't make presumptions about where you used to always vote. You're going to have to double check it this time because we have many new locations that we think voters are going to really like.
Okay. Yeah, I think Dana summed it up really well. I mean, on one side of the coin, there are locations that, are historically well known, like libraries, that we've had to move to a nearby site because the library is simply too small to accommodate socially distanced voting. But on the other side of the coin, we have locations like the Toyota Center, where the Houston Rockets play, that we've opened up as a voting center, not only for in-person to vote in the shadows of Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler, but also as a drive-through site. And so we're excited about partnerships with the Houston Texans, the Houston Rockets, the Houston Dynamo, our soccer team, Houston Food Bank, so many churches and mosques and temples, the Texas Medical Center. We're new and convenient places to vote that also accommodate socially distanced voting. And so we're really, really thrilled to have these partners.
Yeah.
Not your local library anymore, but I think nonetheless exciting venues.
Yeah. Let me add just one quick little thing here. I want voters to get the idea of just how extensive the efforts are, especially in all the large counties in Texas. Just to give you an idea of the difference in putting on this election versus previous elections, we would have guessed this election under normal circumstances would have cost Travis County about $2.2 million, doing all of the old things we used to do. Now, with all of the newer locations, much more staff, a lot more vote centers and early voting locations, all of that now places the price tag for this election at $6.9 million. Yes, and that's just a huge undertaking and a huge expense for us to absorb. The bill is going to come due, but at least for now, voters can know we have done everything we can think of to make voting accessible and safe. We want to see a huge turnout.
We have a comment here from John Shanahan that says, exclamation points, thanks. In staying with the polling places, I want to have poll workers, because this has been something that, has been in the news. The fact that the vast majority of poll workers have traditionally been our senior citizens, been our grandparents. But in the time of COVID, this is also the population that is most at risk. So I know here at the LBJ School, we have partnered with Power the Polls in order to get students in our LBJ community to work the polls. What are you seeing in terms of poll workers, new poll workers wanting to come and participate? And I also have an audience question that says, do you have enough? Because if not, I'm going to figure out how I can help. So Chris, I'll start with you.
We've been very, very happy to see an outpouring of enthusiasm from those in Harris County who want to serve as election workers. The last time I checked, we had over 9,000 applications in to serve as election workers this fall. But we're going to need 11 or 12,000. And so we're still actively recruiting. Our seniors, we saw, we didn't see nearly the drop off that some other states and jurisdictions experience in terms of seniors wanting to serve as election workers. And we think that part of that is because they've seen the hard work that we've done to make sure that election workers are safe during this time. But we know that older members of the population are at greater risk during this time. And so, we're excited about our high school election worker program, where students as young as 16 years old can come and serve and do their civic duty. But of course, folks of all ages have wanted to reach out, sign up, do what they can to help. And so whoever that was with the comment, we still need your help. We'd like you to be an election worker, and we'd love for your friends and family to join.
Yes, let me just add to what Chris is saying, because we're all facing the same issue. We need more workers for this election than we have ever needed before. So we're actively recruiting a lot of new people and League of Women Voters, my commercial real estate industry people, certainly the schools, the high schools, have all stepped up, and we now have a contingent of a bunch of new people from tech sector, younger folks who have gone through the training for the last election and are signing up and telling all their friends to do the same thing. So we're doing great in terms of recruiting people, but we are not finished and we still need a bunch more folks to sign up. So, and we make that pitch every day, calling and recruiting to try to find people who are willing to serve. The other thing that I think has been helpful to us is to have voters and election workers who saw what a PPE supported vote center with safety features looks like, were much more willing to come back and vote this time once they figured out that we really can make it safe, certainly more safe than a lot of other places people go. So that's helped us recruit. The other thing too that we found is that a lot of our more traditional election workers and election judges, we have found that we can bring them into the office. We need a lot of extra people here too to process all of those by mail ballots. And these are experienced long-term workers. So we're thrilled to be able to offer them jobs in a different place with a different set of requirements and protections.
Okay, so I saw that Chris just put in the chat box the link to Harris County, to the election site right there. And then also I know that here on the LBJ end, we're going to be putting links to all of the resources for both Travis County and Harris County if folks are interested in volunteering and participating. Mm-hmm. And so before I move to the audience questions, and there are a boatload, I want to talk about the voter education piece and understanding what folks can bring to the polling place in terms of helping them make a decision, and also just kind of other critical facts that folks need to know before they leave to go vote. Dana, let me start with you, and then we'll move to Chris.
Okay. One of the things that I think is most important for voters is make a plan. Decide exactly how you're going to vote and execute the plan early. One of the things that we need to tell our young voters is we certainly want you to have notes so that you can keep track of all the choices that you want to make on a very long ballot. But if you put them on your cell phone, then you cannot use it in the polling place. So we need to have that. You can bring in candidate literature, you can bring in your own handwritten list, but do not pull that phone out in the middle of the polling place. And we say that because it isn't about you and that we don't want you to use your cell phone. It's for the benefit of your neighbor, because your neighbor is the one who's not sure, are you filming me? Are you recording me? It's all about everybody being able to partake in the safe haven of the polling place. Millennials, keep your phones put away.
All right, good to know. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, making a plan to vote is extremely important. Of course, you have to be registered to vote. Neither of our offices actually does registration. That happens in the tax assessor's office in Travis County and Harris County. But October 5th is the deadline to register to vote. But from there, make the plan. The safest and most convenient way to vote is to vote by mail. You have to be eligible and you have to apply. And the deadline to apply to vote by mail is October 23rd. But don't wait for any of these deadlines. Go now to register to vote, and go now to apply to vote by mail if you're eligible. But if you're not eligible, the next safest way to vote is to vote early. Shorter lines, fewer people. And so take advantage of this record number of early voting days that we have, and go and cast your vote while it's smooth and simple. Get in, get out, get back to the safety of your home and your family. But even if you vote on election day, we're doing everything in our power to keep you safe. From social distancing to sanitizer to PPE to plexiglass. We're making sure that everyone who comes into our voting centers, election workers and voters alike, are as safe as we can possibly make it for you to exercise your role in our democracy.
Chris, I seem to believe that in Harris County, you can print out a sample ballot and fill it out. Did I understand Lizzie correctly, one of your team members, or is that something different? Did I misunderstand her?
No, that's correct, and that's what Dana was talking about as well. But you do have to print that ballot out. You can bring it in as a guide so that you don't have to do any thinking at the booth. You can just fill out what you've already decided. But it has to be printed. If you bring it on your phone, that's going to be an issue because phones aren't allowed to be on within 100 feet of the polling place.
Okay, so it's like the exact same ballot that you're gonna get. Once you walk in, you can print it out and just fill it out there.
Yep.
Yeah, no.
Typically to you based on your address. So it has these specific races that are relevant for you.
Yeah. Super
I
simplification
think all
there.
the large,
That's awesome.
I think all of the large counties are offering voters a way for them to print out their neighborhood ballot so that they can study it,
Good.
mark it up, and be prepared. Part of what Chris was talking about he thinks you ought to make a plan too.
So one question here from Al Giles, and Dana, I know you and I had talked about this earlier, is aside from Harris County, Travis County, our big counties here in Texas, are we seeing similar efforts in the smaller counties?
Well, yes and no. It depends on how small you're talking about. Really small counties have their own way of dealing with their small populations. But there are suburban counties that are having to step up and rethink in the same way the larger counties are, how they're going to provide services to a record-breaking number of voters for this election. So we are seeing it all over the place. You are seeing the really extra efforts happen in the urban areas. The rural areas, you're going to see things, operate a little more like normal in the past. But once again, they've got many of the same challenges. They just have smaller budgets and smaller populations. So it looks a little different.
Okay. All right. So a couple of other questions here. Some of them kind of getting into the weeds. Here. So one person said that they had requested a vote by mail. They were eligible senior citizens, but given the nervousness around the post office and issues that we've talked a little bit about, they've decided to go ahead and vote early. What do they need to do with the ballot that they'll get?
So, both Travis County and Harris County, and this is now the law of the land, for November of 2020, is that any mail ballot, you can drop that off in person. And so, early voting is going to start on October 13th. And chances are you're going to have your mail ballot weeks before October 13th. And so I would frankly encourage you to complete that mail ballot and just come and drop it off in person, and then you'll be done with it. But if you want to go ahead and vote in person, there are two ways to do that. The first one is that you bring the mail ballot with you and you physically surrender it at the polling place. And then you're able to vote a ballot there. The next way is that if you lost that mail ballot or you didn't receive it for some reason, you'd be able to vote provisionally. And as long as your mail ballot never came back to our offices as a voted ballot, then that provisional ballot would be counted on election day.
Okay. Bergen has a question. What is the difference between absentee voting and requesting mail-in ballots? College students can take advantage of absentee, but seniors and at-risk people can't request a ballot for health and safety reasons.
That question has some things that we need to tweak a bit.
Okay.
What we need to say is students have long done by mail voting back at their home addresses. So that's up between them and their county clerks. So we want to be clear about that. Yeah. People who are over 65 are receiving applications for ballot by mail, just automatically. So if they want to vote by mail, all they have to do is respond to the application that has been sent to them and ask for a by mail ballot. And anybody over 65 is automatically qualified to ask. So I think the distinction we're making here is that in Texas, it's all absentee voting by mail. When we talk about in-person voting, we have in-person early voting for the 18 days, as Chris mentioned, as well as then November 3rd, Election Day. Each of those opportunities to vote, those options to vote, is covered by different laws and gives voters, different ways that they can match their lives and their schedules to making a plan to vote. We certainly encourage voters to take advantage of in-person early voting because I agree with Chris. It takes the pressure off Election Day, and you're probably not going to get stuck in a line if you're voting early.
And I just want to be clear. because you're seeing a little bit in the media and from even some government officials saying absentee ballots okay and mail ballots are bad. And let me just be very, very clear about this. They are the exact same thing, period. There is no difference. And beyond that, a number of these government officials who are trying to cast doubts about voting by mail, they vote by mail themselves. And the reason that they vote by mail themselves is that it's convenient and that it's safe. But this stirring of the pot, this misinformation is very intentional. And it's intentional because they don't want people to exercise their right to vote. And so please ignore that and just know that absentee ballots and mail ballots are the exact same thing. In Texas, you have to qualify under 4 categories: age, disability, traveling outside of the county, or being in jail. But they are 100% identical.
No, this is extremely important, extremely helpful. Speaking about safety, we've been talking a lot about the safety in terms of protecting ourselves from the pandemic, but Al Giles has a question about what are you planning to do to deal with people coming to the polls with guns and or to intimidate and discourage voters?
Well, let me take the first stab at it. First of all, we are requiring all voters to wear a mask. If someone comes in without a mask, they will be allowed to vote, but they're going to be placed as far away from all of the voters who are masked and who are taking care of their fellow voters. And it's not going to be a welcoming atmosphere because voters without a mask are viewed as threatening to other voters. So wear a mask, socially distance, use the sanitizer, and use the PPE so that you never have to touch the equipment. I believe that the vast majority of our voters are going to be caring, socially and scientifically correct in the way that they approach making a plan to vote. And in the meantime, we're going to do the best we can. We have not had a lot of trouble. People are beginning, even some folks who had a problem with a mask, they're even beginning to figure out, look, this is the best way we can protect ourselves and our fellow voters.
Okay.
Yeah, and we also in July, we're very pleased that folks on both sides of the aisle were 99+% compliant when it came to masks. And when it came to just, being neighborly and orderly when casting their ballots. We have, because of the importance of this election, we've had conversations with our county attorney's office, with our district attorney's office, with sheriffs and constables to understand, the best way that we can ensure safety at our voting centers and make sure that voters are unimpeded in their right to vote, not harassed, not intimidated, not coerced, anything of that nature. And so we have scenarios in place and we're continuing to develop and tighten those. But we certainly are on guard for any potential shenanigans that might take place here in November.
So Jenny Willis Beach asks if you can discuss who poll monitors are and how they differ from poll workers, and then how do you become a poll monitor?
Chris, you want to take that?
Well, you may know more about it than I do, Dana, but essentially, a poll watcher comes from, a campaign or an organization or a party, and they're entitled to just observe. And that's it. And, there's concern about poll watchers because there's some concern that they might be there with bad intentions, and especially during this time when people want to vote safely and social distance, in a social distance manner, there's a question of what happens if somebody comes, invades my personal space, and that sort of thing. And there are still rules that govern poll watchers, and our training will ensure that our election judges and clerks know how to handle poll watchers, not only to accommodate them in a friendly and cordial manner, but to enforce all of the guidelines to ensure the safety of every voter if something were to go left. And so, I'll hand it over to Daniel to say a little bit more. But poll watchers are entitled to be there. they are not entitled to interfere.
That's exactly right. They are silent observers. They take notes. And if they see something wrong, they report that to whoever had appointed them poll watchers. There is a most unfortunate decision that's come out of the governor's office that says that poll watchers, only while they are actively poll watching, don't have to wear a mask. Well, that will not work at all, because in the past, poll workers tended to hang over the shoulders of people. You will not find that happening now. It's not going to be allowed. Poll watchers need to be close enough so that they can see what's going on. But social distancing will be enforced for poll watchers as well, especially if they show up without wearing a mask. That is a most unfortunate way to treat voters, and we wish the governor would change that decision.
Okay, so I have a comment and then a question. A comment from Al Guile says, please tell participants about the League of Women Voters internet site that provides nonpartisan information about the positions of the people seeking to be elected. Vote 411. Shout out to the League of Women Voters. They are incredible. And a question from a former student of mine, Matthew Frankel. I'm a student and still registered in my home state of Ohio. Can I still work as a poll worker here, even if I'm not registered in Travis County?
I don't think so. I think everybody has to be a registered voter in Travis County in order to participate in any of those, working in any of those options for voting. Students are, I think, the only exception. They can be younger, not quite registered yet, and they can come and work, but everybody else needs to be a registered voter. The only time when you can actually have somebody who's not registered is during early voting. The workers who are doing early voting are considered employees of the county clerk. And so if they live over the county line in the next county, they're qualified to serve as early voting workers.
Okay. So Chris, go ahead.
For non-registered voters. So the students is the most important one. But beyond that, we have call centers, for instance,
yes,
where we're staffing up temporarily. And there are other temporary jobs where you won't be on the scene at the voting center, but you can certainly take part in the process. And so we're asking everyone who's interested to apply, and we're going to try and see if we can't find some ways to employ you if you want to work with us.
Thank you. So Chris, there is a question directed to you. In terms of the awareness of voter registration in Harris County, could Harris County agree with Metro to place voter registration placards on Metro buses and trains prior to the close of voter registration? That is from John Shanahan.
I'd say that's a potential option. That having been said, in Harris County and also in Travis County, the county clerks don't handle voter registration. And so that would be up to the tax assessor's office to form that partnership with Metro. I think it would be a great idea. It might be a bit challenging logistically, not only because these trains are moving around and buses are moving around, but also for safety reasons and people touching various surfaces and so forth. But it's certainly a viable option, at least worth considering. But the tax assessor's office is going to have to consider it. Okay.
All right. Tax assessors, county clerks. Okay. One in the weeds question from an anonymous attendee. One thing is still unclear to me, a pretty informed voter. When the county receives my vote by mail, I know they take possession of them and count the numbers received, but do they actually tally the votes before November 3rd? In other words, at 7:01 on election day, is the county able to tell us which way vote by mail went?
Right. Let me see if I can help with that. We need to make sure our terms are clear, because there is a difference between processing by mail ballots and actually tallying, putting them through the scanner so that you can come up with the totals. Texas law does allow large counties like Harris and Travis to start early with the processing part of the ballot. So you can pull them out of all their envelopes and get them all flattened out so that they're ready to go. You can do the signature verification. All of those pieces of work can happen early. Only on election day do you actually run the tallying. And typically you want to start depending on the volume that you have, early enough in the day so that you complete the tallying close to 7 p.m. So it's a bit of a guessing game, and this time around we're going to make sure that we start early enough on election day that we can make sure if we have 100,000 by-mail ballots, we can get those through the scanners and out at the 7 p.m. first results on election night. Our goal, and I think a lot of us feel the same way, is whatever votes we have in-house are the ones that we want to make sure we get out election night. So all of that to give it to the voters. Now, that said, there's still ballots coming in after election night. Results on election night are unofficial. They always have been. And this time, because we are going to see people taking advantage of every option to vote, provisional ballots, by-mail ballots, late ballots, all of those will continue coming in. And so we're going to have election week where we will have several days after the election. You will see the rest of the ballots collected and tallied, and that final result will be probably a week later.
Election week. I like that. The expectations, not to wait for midnight of that night. I have a question from Ariel. If one has applied to be a poll worker, when can they expect to receive a response on their application?
In Harris County, it's been about a 2-week turnaround. I think as we get closer to early voting starting, that'll be quicker. But I mentioned the influx of applications that we've received, and we're proud that so many have come in. We have been getting 600 and 700 applications a day. But as we're getting closer, I think we've sort of gotten through the bulk of those applications, and we should start to see, slightly faster response rates from us.
Yeah, it's the same in Travis. We've got a lot of people who have already sent in applications, and it looks like early voting is staffed up and ready to go, and we're still working on election day. But here's the reality of what happens with elections. Having staff in the field is always a moving target. There are always people that have something come up at the last minute and they can't make it to their assigned task. So we also have to make sure we've got people on hand who are ready to go out at a moment's notice and substitute for somebody who couldn't come in to work that day. And those numbers are big because sometimes people at the last minute get frightened about COVID and they lose their nerve and end up not doing the job that they said they were going to do. We try our very best to just make sure they're comfortable, they understand everything. So once they're on the list, we know they're committed.
All right, so we're going to take one more question before I give it back to you, Chris and Dana, for some closing remarks. This question comes from Gaylord Armstrong, who wants to know about another Texas Tribune headline, another Texas Supreme Court decision yesterday requiring Green Party candidates to be on the ballot. So what effect does that have for the elections?
Well, let me first say thank you to Al Giles for calling in and doing the shout out for the League of Women Voters, because they've been terrific. And hi, Gaylord. Yes, yesterday, all the county clerks and elections administrators got really bad news from the Texas Supreme Court. After the deadlines had already, grown very short, the Supreme Court decided at the last minute to put the Green Party candidates back on the ballot. That meant that if you were following along your normal schedule as a county clerk, you probably had already submitted your ballots to a contractor to have printed up. And so all of those ballots were printed and ready to go so that we can meet the federal deadline for military ballots on Friday and Saturday. And now this decision has made everybody late. It's been a huge extra expense. It was not helpful for the court to throw in this at the very last minute. So it's not okay, and every county is going to be scrambling. We're probably all going to be thrown late because of yesterday's late-breaking, unfortunate decision. The issue was about whether the Libertarians and the Green Party candidates should be allowed to be on the ballot because they did not do petitions in lieu of a filing fee or pay a filing fee. And their argument was that they didn't have to do the same thing as regular candidates or the two major party candidates. We do not agree that, some people have to pay a filing fee and some people don't. So we're very concerned now about trying to regroup and get everything back on track and back on schedule. That's part of what I was talking about earlier, about everybody's really busy today trying to regroup.
Well, and yesterday, Chris, was a doubly rough day with the two decisions from the Texas Supreme Court, the Green Party candidates, and then the decision blocking the sending out of the ballots. So with that, Chris, let me start with you with some closing remarks, and then we'll go to Dana.
Absolutely. Look, democracy as it's intended to function relies on voters to cast your votes to choose the next generation of your leaders to direct our country, our states, our cities, our districts. And it's our job as election administrators to bring democracy to you, to the voters in our jurisdictions, to ensure that you can vote safely and conveniently and with the peace of mind that your votes are going to be counted. And the Harris County Clerk's Office takes that responsibility very, very seriously. We want our voters to be informed. We want our voters to have access. We want our voters to know that their votes are going to count. And so we've taken unprecedented steps to make voting simple and straightforward for the people of Harris County. We've gone above and beyond in providing information and education to our voters. And we're going to continue to do that. And, as we move towards November, these days are getting a lot longer. And we know that it's for good reason. And so we're going to continue to work tirelessly to ensure and protect voting rights for the people of Harris County. We want you to know that your votes are what drives this democracy. And so you need to make a plan to vote. You need to remember that voting by mail is the safest and most convenient way to vote if you're eligible. You need to remember that voting early is the next safest and most convenient way to vote if you can do that. But even if you wait till Election Day, we're doing everything in our power to keep you safe. We're doing everything in our power to make sure that you can vote in a way that is simple and straightforward and safe for you and for your family. And we're committed to that. And so it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And Chris, anytime you want to come and get your PhD at the LBJ School, you're welcome. You mentioned that earlier before we went live. And you have Dana here, a proud LBJ alum. I will leave you with the last word, Dana.
All right, thank you. Voters look similar throughout the whole world. The way elections are conducted in other countries looks very similar to the way we do it here in the United States, except for there is more emphasis in the United States on elections being conducted by the people. We don't have military involvement. We don't have an overly lot of administrative development. It relies on our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers to actually make our democracy work. So as Chris said, we want to invite people in. We want voters and election workers to all have a very positive experience, especially our young people, because we want to instill in them the feeling that they need. Once they start voting, it's a habit that they retain for life. So I guess what I would say to voters is, we know you want to vote in the presidential election. There is such pent-up demand for this. But remember that the down ballot candidates, the ones that are all the way at the end of that very long ballot, city council people, school trustee members, actually have more of an impact on your pocketbook and your daily life than the races at the top of the ballot that get all the attention. So hang in there, vote all the way through your ballot, make that part of your plan. And we realize that voters are going to have a little extra job this time around because they don't have that quick check of having straight party voting. Nevertheless, make a plan, get it all organized, and then go vote early. The earlier, the better.
I love it. Hang around, make a plan. I want to thank you both so much, Dana and Chris, and thank all of you that joined us today. Thank you for the incredible questions. Also, please know that this session will be posted on our LBJ in the Arena site by tomorrow, along with all of the links to the informational pieces that we mentioned in this talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye from the LBJ School.
Thank you.